Chapter 11, the name of the chapter is Azorik, page Kuf Aleph. Start from the top. If the depth of the pit is 10,
right,
and the width is not 10,
10 by 10. Where are you in the front?
The top. If the sheep, not the pit, if the sheep is 10 tefachim deep, but not 10 tefachim high above the water. You understand? The bottom of the
bottom
is sinking.
Like this,
Is sinking 10 feet,
and it's like
10 tefachim.
This is 10 down, and this is 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're allowed to carry from inside the ship to the sea, but not from the sea into it. Why? The Gemara says, meaning you can toss thing into the sea, but not from the sea to it. What's the reason? Because in doing so, one carries from a karmelis to a private domain, and you're not allowed to metaltel mekarmelis. Karmelis is the sea, and private domain is the sheep.
Yeah.
But if you're taking from the sheep to the sea, you're also transporting from private domain to karmelis. Why should that be permitted? Rather, it's not evident. Rabbi Yehuda is speaking of transferring from the sheep to the sea via the sheep's rim, by pouring something on top of the sheep's wall and letting it flow down the outer wall of the sheep into the sea. So it's not directly throwing it into karmelis, into the sea. Learn from this that the sages did not decree a prohibition on transferring through one's force in regard to a karmelis. Shmamina, indeed, learn from this. Also the Meishan, these small boats of Meishan, one may carry in them only within 4 amas, for they are considered a karmelis, even the boat themselves, because they're very small boats. This was said only where within the 3 tefachim of the bottom. The boat does not yet have a width of 4 tefachim. But if within 3 tefachim of the bottom, the boat has a width of 4 tefachim, we have no problem with carrying in it, for it is then a private domain. So the point is that the boat has to have a width of 4 tefachim to be considered private domain. And even in the first case, if one fills the bottom of the boat with reeds and willow branches, we have no problem with it if this raises the floor to the point where the boat widens to 4 tefachim.
How is this going to happen if you put the reeds and the willow branches in? I'm going to see what 8 says.
For the walls then reach the floor and are not suspended. However, the walls of the boat must be 10 tefachim high from that point up in order to make the boat reshus hayochid. It's like adding a wall to it, putting boards or putting reeds in it. In this regard, the principle of extend the walls downward and thereby legally extend the walls to the ground below the boat, so that they are no longer considered suspended. Milay Tanya, has it not been taught in the Beit Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, no, it's if one stuck a pole in the ground of the public domain, and on top of it was a basket 4 tefachim wide. When he threw an object from the public domain and it landed on the basket, he's liable because the basket is considered the shus hayachid. Al mamrin an gud ochis mechitzoso. We see that we say the principle of extend the walls downward to create an enclosure of 4 tefachim wide below the basket. Even below the basket, it's considered a mechitza. Extend the walls downward to remedy the legal defect of a suspended partition and thereby render the boat a private domain. Masiv lo Rabbi Yosef lo Yishmael Rabbi Yehuda. We did not hear what Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rabbi Motu B'Mishum Rabbi Chia, and some inclined to say that it was the name of Rabbi Chia. V'toni alo, it was taught in a Baisa v'Chachamim poitrin. It was taught in a Baisa concerning the ruling of Yosef the son of Rabbi Yehuda. V'Chachamim poitrin, and the rabbis exempt one who throws an object from a public domain to the top of this basket, because they do not consider the top of the basket a private domain. We see that in the view of the rabbis, we do not apply the principle of extend the walls downward in this way. What then is of Nachman's question? And you not hold as such as well? Do you not agree that the principle of extend the wall downward is accepted even in such a case? Tanyo Amud Birshus Rabim Gavoya Asor V'Rochavar Bo, a post in the public domain that is 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide. Ein Bikorar Bo, but its base is not 4 tefachim wide. V'yesh B'kotzu Shelo Shloishon, it narrow, and its narrow part is 3 tefachim high. When one throws an object and it lands on the post, he is liable for transferring from a public to a private domain. Now, since the lower part of the post walls are not 4 tefachim wide, the top of the post should not be a private domain. Yet the Baisa rules that the top of the post is a private domain.
The top.
Yeah.
But not the
Baisa rules that the top of the post is a private.
But in between the top and
But we're not extending the walls to say that the whole thing is private. You see that we say extend the post upper walls straight downward to the ground to create enclosed area 4 tefachim wide.
So they're making it artificial.
Here too, in the case of the boat, we should apply the principle of extend the wall downward to remove the defect of a suspended wall, in parentheses suspended wall, from the boat's upper walls and render the boat a private domain. Now, this Baisa is stated anonymously and would therefore seem to represent a generally accepted view. Abai therefore continues, Midi Iria. Accordingly, is there any proof from the ruling of the sages that Rav Yosef cited? Rather, there, in the case of the basket atop the pole, the extension is a wall through which kids penetrate, which, in the view of the sages, nullifies the downward extension. For this reason, the sages dispute Rabbi Yosef the son of Rabbi Yehuda and rule that the top of the basket is not a private domain. Here, however, in the case of the post, the extension is a wall through which kids do not penetrate, because the base is only slightly less than 4 tefachim wide, and they would therefore have no actually, and they would therefore have to actually rub against it to penetrate the extension. The sages therefore agree in this case that the walls at the top of the posts are extended downward to create a private domain on top. By the same token, the sages would agree in the case of the sheep that we can extend the wall downward into the water.
Ship.
Yeah, the sheep. And extend the wall downward into the water and create a private domain inside the boat because there are no kids in the water to penetrate through the extension. Abba's distinction in regard to the boat is questioned. Amar le Ravacha brei de Rav Acho le Ravashi gabis fino nami haika bekias dogim. But in the case of a sheep as well, there is a penetration by fish through the extension beneath the boat. Why is the principle of extend the wall downward operative in that case? Amar le bekias dogim lo yishmei bekia. Penetration by fish is not considered penetration with regard to nullifying a wall extended downward. And from where do you know to say this? For Rav Tavlo inquired of Rav, Mechitza tluya mashitatir bechurba. Mechitza tluya. Can a suspended wall permit carrying in a ruin? Is carrying permitted in a building whose wall is breached at ground level but is intact above? And Rav said to him, a suspended wall does not permit carrying within the area enclosed by it. Ela b'mayim, except in regard to water, to enclose a body of water. Kal hu she'ekelu chachamim b'mayim. It is a special leniency that the sages allowed in water, to allow people to draw water on the Shabbos. But there is a penetration of fish through the extension of the wall. Rather learn from this that penetration by fish through a wall extension is not considered penetration and does not nullify it. Rather, the extension remains valid in the water despite the fish. Sfinos Kshuas, the Mishnah continues concerning sheeps that are tied together. We may carry objects from the sheep to that sheep. There was a pshita, this is obvious, since the sheep are tied and thus will not move apart. Why should one not be permitted to carry between them? The ruling was only needed to permit carrying between the sheeps by way of a small boat wedged between them. It teaches that although the boat could slip from between the sheeps and cause carrying between them to be prohibited, one is nonetheless permitted to carry between them so long as the boat is there. Amar le Rav Safra Moshe Shapir Komot. Moshe, have you then spoken well? Metaltelin mizol zotenan. In the Mishnah we have learned as follows: we may carry objects from this ship to that ship. The wording implies a direct transfer between the ship to the other, and not in one which the person must first cross upon a third boat. This ruling was only needed to teach that in a case of ships with two different owners, the owners may join in an eruv and carry from this sheep to that one. The Mishnah teaches that even ships are included in the law of eruv. The Gemara supports Rav Safra's explanation with a Baisa. It teaches this law explicitly. Sheep that are tied together. Their owners may join in an eruv and carry from this one to that one. The sheep are later separated, they become forbidden. to carry between them, since their separation negates the Eruv. Chozu v'nikshu, if they are once again tied together, bein sheginu vein mezidim, bein anusim vein mutim, whether those who tie them are acting inadvertently or deliberately, unwillingly, or accidentally, chozu le'teron orishon, the ships return to their original permit. The Eruv is automatically re-established, and one is permitted to carry between the ships. We see from this Baisa that the law of Eruv applies even to ships. And so too in the case of mats that are hung to from cubicles. Yeah, and so too in the case of mats that are hung to form cubicles in the public domain. The residents of the various cubicles may join in an Eruv and carry from this cubicle to that one. If the mats are later rolled up, the area of the cubicles becomes forbidden for carrying in, since it reverts to its status as a public domain. Chozu v'nifusu, if the mats are once again hung, bein shoygin, bein mezidin, bein anusin, bein mutin, chozu le'ter rishon. Whether those who hung them do so inadvertently or deliberately, unwillingly or accidentally, the cubicles return to their original permit. They are rendered once again private domains, and the Eruv between them is automatically re-established. One is therefore permitted to carry between them. For any partition that is erected on the Shabbos, whether inadvertently or deliberately, Shema Mechitza is considered valid partition. Although these mats were rehung on the Shabbos, they are regarded as valid partitions and will therefore render the cubicles private domains. Since these domains are joined by the re-established Eruv, one may carry between them. The Baisa is taught that partitions erected on the Shabbos are valid in all respects, even in so far as to permit carrying within their bounds. In light of this teaching, the Gemara questions a statements made by Rav Nachman concerning the Baisa's final clause. Eini, is it truly so? Well, a partition erected on the Shabbos indeed permit carrying. Rav Nachman, concerning the Baisa's statement, the partition erected on Shabbos considered a valid one. Rav Nachman stated, Lo shonu lo lizrek, the rabbis taught this law only with regard
to carrying in that area,
to rendering one liable for throwing an object from a public domain into the area enclosed by this partition. Aval etaltel also, but with regard to carrying in that area, it is prohibited. So the Baisa teaches that even if the mats are rehung on the Shabbos, the cubicles returned to the original permit. This implies that one is even permitted to carry between them. How can Rav Nachman state otherwise? The Gemara reconciles Rav Nachman's statements with the Baisa's ruling. When was Rav Nachman's ruling said? It was said only with regard to partitions erected in deliberate violations of the Shabbos. In such a case, the Baisa indeed does not mean to permit carrying. In a case of partitions erected inadvertently, however, even Rav Nachman will admit that the Baisa permits one to carry within the bounds of the partitions. The Mishnah ruled that if the two ships are tied together, one may carry between them. The Gemara now enters a discussion regarding the sort of attachment required. Amar Shmuel, v'afilu kshuris b'chut hasarbo, even if the ships are tied together with no more than the string of a cloak. which is only a thin cord, one may nonetheless carry from one to the other. If this string is one that is able to hold the ships in place, pshita, it is obvious that it may be used. And if it is not able to hold them in place, why should it permit carrying between them? Rather, since ships tied with this string are sure to separate, they should be considered as ships that were never tied, and carrying from one to the other should be prohibited. The Gemara answers, Le'olam, we're actually dealing with a case where he's capable of erecting them. Shmuel found it necessary to state explicitly that if it is used to tie boats, one may carry between them. If Shmuel was coming to exclude the ruling of our Mishnah from a requirement that he himself taught in another similar case, the Tanan, for it was taught in a Mishnah with regard to a ship whose anchoring cable was tied beneath a roof that sheltered a corpse. Very interesting scenario. With regard to a ship whose anchoring cable was tied beneath a roof that sheltering a corpse. If one tied the ship with something sort of cable, something able to hold it in place, maybe it brings tuma to the ship, since the cable will itself acquire the same level of tuma as that possessed by the corpse.
Are we saying that the corpse is on the ship, on one ship?
No, let's say the corpse was inside a coffin.
Yeah.
And the coffin was on shore, for example.
Okay.
And you threw the anchor of the boat onto that coffin. Now the anchor is holding onto the coffin. So he's saying that the rope is transferring the tuma into the boat, to the ship. Yeah.
Okay, well, all right, fine.
But only it's double shmamido. Only if it's actually holding onto the boat.
Yeah, that's.
But if it's not able to hold it, if something unable to hold it in place, it does not bring tuma to the ship. Since in this case the cable did not acquire the same level of tuma as the corpse. This means that the ship must be tied with an iron chain, for only then will the very tuma of the corpse be acquired by the chain.
Strange case.
Right. We see that in this case of a tied sheep, Shmuel requires that it be tied with an iron chain. Shmuel therefore felt it necessary to state explicitly that in the case of our Mishnah, an iron chain is not required, even if the ships are attached with mere string. With a mere string, one will be permitted to carry between them. It is only with regard to the law of Tumah, concerning which it is written, the body of someone felled by a sword, which teaches that a sword or any other metal implement that touches a dead body is itself like the body, and that yes, a metal chain is required, since this pasuk teaches that only implements made of metal can acquire the same level of Tumah as that possessed by the corpse itself. Aval inyan Shabbos with regard to the law of carrying from sheep to sheep on the Shabbos, kevan deyochel amida, so long as the cable is able to hold the ships in place, afilu bechut sabul, even if they are tied with the string of a cloak, it is sufficient. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow. Halacha.